This is a true story, and it's one of the hardest things I've ever had to share. It's not a story about a happy ending, not really. It's a story about a necessary one, about how sometimes the only way to heal a wound is to cauterize it with a fire hot enough to burn down the whole world. The crystal champagne flute in my ex-husband's hand caught the golden light of the Napa Valley sunset, throwing a tiny dancing rainbow onto the pristine white tablecloth. It was our daughter Lily's wedding, held at the impossibly beautiful Auberge du Soleil, a place so breathtaking it felt like a dream. Terraced villas cascaded down a sun-drenched hill, overlooking vineyards that rolled out like a plush green carpet. The air smelled of jasmine, old money, and self-satisfaction. Richard, my ex-husband, the undisputed king of his own universe, had risen to give the father of the bride toast. He was in his element, a master of ceremonies in a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my car. He started by praising our daughter, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed emotion that I knew was as hollow as a chocolate Easter bunny. He spoke of her first steps, her graduation, her beauty and grace, all while subtly framing them as achievements of his own masterful parenting. Then, his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, found mine across the sea of perfectly dressed guests, a cruel, familiar smirk, the one he always used when he was about to land a killing blow, played on his lips. And I must also give a special thank you, he began, his voice dripping with a magnanimous condescension that was his signature, to Eleanor. He paused for effect, letting my name hang in the air like a piece of lint on a cashmere sweater. While I handled the logistics of making a day like this possible, her contribution of simply being here is, well, it's truly enough. The insult, so perfectly wrapped in the language of a toast, landed exactly as he'd intended. A few guests chuckled, others shifted uncomfortably. It publicly cemented my status as the penniless, irrelevant ex-wife, a charity case allowed to attend the grand pageant he had single-handedly financed. As the polite, conditioned applause began, a calm, meticulously dressed man I'd hired for this exact moment stepped away from the periphery where he'd been pretending to admire the view. He moved with a quiet purpose, his steps measured, and placed a thick manila envelope directly in front of Richard's half-eaten plate of Chilean sea bass. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. To understand why I chose my only daughter's wedding day to serve my ex-husband with a federal fraud and racketeering lawsuit, you have to understand the 22 years that led to that moment. You have to understand the slow, insidious architecture of my erasure. Richard Sterling wasn't just a man, he was a brand. To the world, especially the gilded world of San Francisco's elite, he was a real estate mogul who hadn't just built skyscrapers, but had personally sculpted the city's skyline. His name was carved into the marble donor walls of the SF MoMA and UCSF Medical Center. He was relentlessly charismatic, possessed of a bone-deep confidence that most people mistook for strength. For over 2 decades, I was the woman who managed that brand behind the scenes. I met him when I was 24, a bright-eyed art history graduate with a promising career as a junior curator. He was 30, already a rising star, and he swept me off my feet with a tidal wave of charm and ambition. He loved my eye for art, my understanding of culture. He said I gave him the class his new money lacked. We married in a lavish ceremony at Grace Cathedral and moved into a sprawling Victorian in Pacific Heights with a view that could make a poet weep. I was his partner, I thought. I helped him choose the art for his building lobbies. I planned the galas that wooed investors. I cultivated the friendships with the city's political players. I gave up my career, willingly, to raise our daughter, Lily, and to become the perfect corporate wife. I believed my work was essential to our shared success. I thought we were a team, building an empire together. The truth was, he saw me as a valuable asset. And like any asset that was no longer performing to his expectations, I was slated for liquidation. The divorce wasn't a disagreement. It was a corporate takeover of my life. The first sign, the one I foolishly ignored, came about 2 years before the end. We were at a dinner party with the mayor. I had been working on a proposal for a new public arts initiative, a project I was passionate about. When the mayor asked me what I'd been up to, I started to explain my idea. Richard cut me off with a hearty laugh, placing a heavy hand on my arm. "Oh, Eleanor and her little projects," he said, winking at the mayor. "She's a dreamer. It's a good thing one of us has our feet on the ground, right?" The table laughed along with him. I felt my face flush with a heat that had nothing to do with the wine. He had dismissed me, infantilized me with a smile. It was a small thing, a paper cut, but it was the beginning of a death by 1,000 cuts. The end itself began the day I found the emails. It was a Saturday morning. He was out on his beloved yacht, the Resolute, entertaining investors. I was looking for a tax document on his laptop in our shared home office, something he'd asked me to find. He never guarded his computer around me. His arrogance was my key. I found the tax folder, but another folder sitting on the desktop caught my eye. It was labeled simply Project Nightingale. A code name. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. Inside were not love letters to another woman. That would have been a cleaner, more honest wound. It was worse. It was a series of emails, financial statements, and legal strategy memos between Richard, his chief financial officer, and a team of lawyers I'd never heard of. The oldest emails were dated over a year prior. They were war plans, cold, methodical, and utterly ruthless. There were spreadsheets detailing our shared assets, with columns on how to undervalue them, memos outlining the strategy to transfer millions of dollars into a series of newly created anonymous LLCs based in Delaware and Nevada. One email from Richard to his lead attorney was burned into my memory. Need to establish a narrative of Eleanor's financial incompetence and emotional instability. We need to get ahead of this. By the time she knows what's happening, the game needs to be over. The goal is not a settlement. The goal is total asset protection. She walks away with the initial offer, or she walks away with nothing. He had codenamed the dissolution of our marriage Project Nightingale, a sickeningly poetic reference to the bird that sings so sweetly as it presses its heart against a thorn. When I confronted him that evening, after he'd returned smelling of sea salt and expensive scotch, the charming mask didn't just slip. He tore it off and threw it in my face. I held up the printed email, my hand shaking so badly the paper rattled. He looked at it, then at me, and his eyes, the eyes I had loved and trusted, turned into voids. There was no apology, no remorse, no flicker of shame. There was only ice. "You went through my computer," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "That's a shame. I was going to make this easy for you, Eleanor. A quiet, dignified exit." He took a step closer, invading my space, a predator asserting his dominance. "Now, it will be difficult. You have no idea what you're up against. I will bury you in legal fees. I will turn our friends against you. I will make sure Lily understands that her mother is a hysterical, grasping woman who tried to destroy her father. Sign the papers my lawyers send you on Monday, and you can walk away with a sliver of your dignity. Fight me." He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper, "and I will grind you and everything you think you are into dust." I fought him. It was the stupidest, bravest, and most necessary thing I have ever done. The 18 months that followed were a descent into a special kind of hell. He was true to his word. He hired the most feared law firm in California, a veritable army of litigators who saw my life as a strategic battlefield. They buried me in paperwork, demanding decades of financial records I didn't have. They deposed me for days on end, asking invasive, humiliating questions about my spending habits, my mental health, my friendships, trying to paint me as the unstable, incompetent woman from their fabricated narrative. Old friends, women I had vacationed with, and whose children I had babysat, either stopped returning my calls or, worse, provided affidavits supporting Richard's claims. Their husbands did business with him. Their loyalty was a commodity he had purchased long ago. The court became his stage. The judge was an old acquaintance from the Olympic Club, a man I'd had dinner with a dozen times. He looked at me with a pained sort of pity, as if I were a wounded animal that needed to be put out of its misery. Richard's lawyers presented their evidence, doctored ledgers, cherry-picked credit card statements, and the testimony of his CFO, who perjured himself by attesting to my erratic financial requests. My own lawyer, a decent but outgunned man, was like a rowboat against a battleship. In the end, Richard won. Utterly. The court accepted his fraudulent valuation of our assets. The hidden LLCs were never discovered. I was awarded a settlement that was, after my legal fees were paid, barely enough to live on for a year. It was a joke, a final public slap in the face. I lost the house, the art, the friends, the life I had poured myself into. Worst of all, I lost time with Lily. She was 19, a sophomore at Stanford, and Richard masterfully played her like a violin. He paid her tuition directly, bought her a new car, set her up in a beautiful apartment in Palo Alto. He poisoned her against me with quiet, concerned conversations about my bitterness and instability. He would call her and say things like, "I'm so worried about your mother. She seems to be having a hard time accepting reality." He framed his financial control as generosity. "Don't worry about asking your mom for money, sweetie," he'd tell her. "I know things are tight for her. Just let me know what you need. I've got you." He became the hero, the stable parent, while I became the desperate, pathetic one. My new reality was a one-bedroom apartment in Oakland's Adams Point with aging carpets and a view of a concrete retaining wall. The silence was the loudest thing in it. It was the sound of my own erasure. For the first year I was a ghost. I slept. I cried. I walked through the grocery store in a daze, staring at the prices of things I used to buy without a thought. The shame was a physical presence, a heavy cloak I couldn't take off. I was no longer Mrs. Richard Sterling. I was a 51-year-old woman with a massive gap in her resume and no marketable skills, a nobody. Meanwhile, Richard thrived. He was featured on the cover of San Francisco magazine, his new 28-year-old girlfriend beaming at his side under the headline, "Richard Sterling's Third Act, Building a New Life and a New San Francisco." My name was not mentioned once in the 10-page spread. It was as if 22 years of my life had been meticulously edited out of history. The turning point wasn't some grand epiphany. It was a single, misdirected piece of mail that arrived on a bleak, foggy Tuesday. It was a franchise tax notice from the Delaware Secretary of State addressed to Sterling Summit Holdings, LLC, at my old Pacific Heights address. The post office, through some long-forgotten forwarding order, had sent it to me. I almost tossed it in the recycling bin, assuming it was more corporate junk. But the name snagged in my memory. Sterling Summit. It was the name we had dreamed up for a ski chalet we wanted to build in Aspen, a fantasy we'd sketched on a cocktail napkin years ago during a blizzard. It was a private joke, a piece of our shared history. A history he was now using for his secret business, a cold, sharp curiosity, a feeling I hadn't felt in years, cut through the fog of my depression. I sat at my wobbly kitchen table, the envelope feeling strangely heavy in my hands. With fingers that trembled slightly, I tore it open. It was a simple form, a bill for a few $100s to keep the LLC in good standing. But it contained a universe of information. an incorporation date, a file number, the name of a registered agent. The date was 10 years ago, right in the middle of our marriage, just before Richard embarked on his most ambitious and profitable development project. I knew every detail of our finances, or so I thought. I had signed every joint tax return. I had never, ever heard of Sterling Summit Holdings. My heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. This wasn't just an oversight. This was a secret with a paper trail. I went to my second-hand laptop, the screen flickering slightly, and typed in the address for the Delaware Division of Corporations. I paid the $12 fee for a status check. There it was, an active, anonymous LLC, a ghost company. For the first time since Richard had looked at me with those dead eyes in his office, I felt something other than despair. It was a cold, sharp, and utterly clarifying rage. I had a thread, and I was going to pull on it until his whole damn sweater unraveled. That single piece of mail became my life's work. My despair, which had been a vast, stagnant ocean, now had a current. It had a direction. I enrolled in a paralegal certificate program at a local community college. I sat in classrooms with kids younger than my own daughter, learning about corporate structures, discovery processes, and legal research. I was the oldest person in the room, the one with the sad story, but I didn't care. I was arming myself. I took a part-time job at the Oakland Public Library, shelving books, the quiet scent of old paper and dust becoming my sanctuary. The pay was abysmal, but it gave me free access to legal research databases that would have cost me thousands. I became a creature of the night, my face illuminated by the blue glow of the computer screen as I descended into the labyrinth of shell corporations. My research revealed that Sterling Summit Holdings was the sole member of another LLC, this one registered in Nevada, called Pacific Crest Ventures. That, in turn, owned a stake in a third company, Seacliff Imports, which seemed to be a front for moving money through art acquisitions. It was a complex, tangled web designed to frustrate and confuse. But in one of the old digital filings for Pacific Crest, buried deep in an addendum, Richard had made a tiny, arrogant mistake. A document required a physical signatory agent, and the name listed was Martin Wexler. Martin was Richard's college roommate, a mousy, brilliant accountant whom Richard had always described as a bit of a sad sack. Years ago, Richard told me they'd had a bitter falling out over a business deal and hadn't spoken since. He had used Martin's obscurity and our supposed estrangement as the perfect cover. Martin Wexler was the keeper of his secrets. Finding Martin was the next step, but I knew I couldn't be the one to do it. He would run straight to Richard. I needed a professional, a warrior. I cashed out the last of my meager retirement funds, a terrifying gamble that left me with nothing in reserve. I found Isabella Diaz through an online forum for women fighting financial abuse and divorce. Her name was passed around in whispers, a legend, a former federal prosecutor who had gone into private practice to hunt the big predators who wear bespoke suits. Her office wasn't in a glittering downtown tower. It was a converted warehouse space in Jack London Square with exposed brick walls and an espresso machine that hissed and steamed like a dragon. Izzy herself was a force of nature. She was sharp, fast-talking, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. She wore a perfectly tailored blazer over a band T-shirt, and she didn't waste a single word. I laid out my story on the polished concrete table between us. I showed her the tax notice, the corporate charts I had painstakingly created, the name of Martin Wexler. I expected skepticism. Instead, she listened with a ferocious intensity. When I finished, she was silent for a full minute, her gaze fixed on the diagram of LLCs. Finally, she looked at me. "Your ex-husband isn't just a cheat, Eleanor," she said, her voice a low growl. "He's a professional criminal who has been running a multi-million-dollar fraud and tax evasion scheme for over a decade. He used your marital assets as his personal slush fund to build his empire, then committed perjury to steal your half of it." She leaned forward, her eyes blazing. Men like Richard Sterling, they don't believe rules apply to them. They build fortresses of wealth and influence and think they're gods. The system is designed to protect them. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. That's why it's so much fun to burn their fortresses down. The question is, Eleanor, what do you want? Do you want a settlement, or do you want a reckoning? I didn't hesitate. I want a reckoning. Izzy assembled our war council. It consisted of me, her, and a forensic accountant named Arthur Chen. Arthur was the opposite of Izzy in every way. He was a quiet, gentle man in his 60s who wore cardigans and spoke in soft, precise sentences. But in the world of numbers, he was a stone-cold killer. Our war room was a windowless conference room in Izzy's office, the walls covered in whiteboards. Arthur took my research and, within days, had transformed it into a stunningly clear map of Richard's criminal enterprise. "He's using a technique called layering," Arthur explained, pointing a laser at the board. "The money moves from Sterling Summit to Pacific Crest. Then it's used to purchase an overvalued piece of art through Seacliff Imports. The art is then sold at a loss to a foreign buyer, who is, in reality, another shell company Richard controls. The clean money is then loaned back to his legitimate company, Sterling Holdings, as an investment from an anonymous foreign partner. He's been doing this for years. He's laundered at least $50 million. While Arthur followed the money, Izzy hired an investigator, a grizzled ex-cop named Frank, to follow Martin Wexler. Frank was a ghost. He learned Wexler's life inside and out. The sad cheese sandwich he ate in his car every day for lunch, the cheap whiskey he drank alone at a dive bar after work, and most importantly, the secret, panicked trips he took to a casino in Reno every few months. Wexler had a massive gambling problem, and Richard was using it as leverage. Wexler wasn't a loyal soldier. He was a hostage. This was the crack we could exploit. All the while, the grand theater of Lily's wedding played out. Lily, eager to have her family present, a united front, insisted I be involved. These meetings were a special form of torture. I would sit in the opulent offices of the wedding planner next to Richard and his young girlfriend Amber and listen to them debate the merits of calla lilies versus orchids, of a string quartet versus a live jazz band. Richard would play the benevolent host, occasionally turning to me with that sickeningly patronizing smile. "What are your thoughts, Eleanor? We value your input." I would smile back, a placid mask of serene acceptance. "It all sounds wonderful, Richard. Whatever makes Lily happy." He saw a defeated woman. He saw a ghost. He had no idea he was sitting next to the architect of his own destruction, that with every invoice he approved, he was helping me document the scale of the assets he would soon forfeit. The juxtaposition was dizzying. In the morning, I would be in the war room with Izzy and Arthur, tracing illicit wire transfers to the Cayman Islands. In the afternoon, I'd be tasting wedding cakes, Richard's laughter echoing in the small bakery as he made a joke about my simpler tastes. My self-control was forged into steel in the fires of those meetings. The strategy to serve him at the wedding was my idea. Izzy was hesitant at first. "It's brutal, Eleanor. It's his daughter's wedding." "He made his daughter a pawn in our divorce." I shot back, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "He used her as a weapon, to hurt me and a prop to aggrandize himself. This wedding isn't a celebration of her love. It's the coronation of King Richard. It's his ultimate PR event. I want to strip him of his crown in front of his entire court." Izzy studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Eleanor, let's plan a wedding." The final piece was Wexler. Izzy approached him in the parking lot of a Trader Joe's. She didn't threaten him. She laid out his options with the calm precision of a surgeon. She showed him copies of his wire transfers to offshore bookies. "Richard has been grooming you to be the fall guy, Martin," she said simply. "When this goes down, he will paint you as a rogue accountant, a desperate gambler who embezzled from him. He will walk away. You will go to prison for 20 years. I'm offering you a different door. Cooperate with us. Testify to the truth. The U.S. Attorney's Office will grant you full immunity. You get to save yourself. It's your only way out." She gave him her card and walked away. For 2 weeks there was silence. I was convinced he had gone to Richard. My entire case, my entire life, hung on the decision of this one terrified man. Then, 1 week before the wedding, he called. He was in. He spent the next 3 days in a hotel with Izzy and a court reporter, giving a sworn deposition that was the nail in Richard's coffin. The day of the wedding was the most surreal of my life. I felt like an actor in a play where only I knew the final scene. I helped Lily into her breathtaking gown. She was a vision of youth and hope. And a part of my heart ached with guilt. She was an innocent in this war. As I fastened the tiny pearl buttons on the back of her dress, she caught my eye in the mirror. "Thanks for being so great through all this, Mom," she said softly. "I know it hasn't been easy with Dad, footing the bill for everything." The comment, so casually delivered, so thoroughly programmed, solidified my resolve. I hugged her fiercely. "Today is about you," I whispered. "Nothing else matters." The ceremony under the ancient olive trees was beautiful. I watched Richard walk our daughter down the aisle, his face a perfect mask of paternal pride, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear focus. At the reception, I played my part. I accepted the pitying glances from old friends. I made polite conversation. I watched Richard hold court, laughing, accepting congratulations, the Sun King in his golden court. He was at the absolute apex of his life, invincible and adored. And I was the serpent in his Eden. Then came the toasts. The best man, then the maid of honor, and then Richard stood, tapping his glass. The crowd hushed. He gave his speech, and when he delivered his final condescending barb at me, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had given him the rope. This was the moment he would hang himself with it. I gave the barely perceptible nod to David, the process server, who was dressed as a guest. He began his slow, deliberate walk toward the head table. The world seemed to slow down. I saw every detail. The way the waiters held their silver trays, the flicker of the candles on the tables, the adoring look on Amber's face as she gazed at Richard. When David placed the envelope in front of him, Richard's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of annoyance. "What's this?" he asked, his voice still carrying its usual authority. David leaned in and spoke the 2 words that would end his reign. "You've been served." Richard tore open the envelope with an air of irritation, his eyes scanning the first page. I watched his face. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The blood drained away, leaving a pasty gray pallor. His jaw went slack. His eyes, wide with disbelief, darted around as if looking for an escape route where there was none. He was reading the words, "United States District Court, Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations, RICO Act, Conspiracy to Commit Tax Fraud." He was reading the name of his star witness, Martin Wexler. A murmur went through the crowd. Phones began to light up under the tables. Izzy's press release had just gone live. Every major news outlet in the Bay Area had the story. Real estate titan Richard Sterling sued for massive fraud by ex-wife. Federal investigation pending. He looked up, his gaze frantic, and his eyes locked on mine. In that one silent, stretched-out moment, he saw it all. The years of my quiet research, my meticulous planning, my unrelenting quest for this exact moment. He saw not the ghost of his defeated wife, but the architect of his ruin. He opened his mouth, but only a choked gasp came out. The champagne flute, forgotten in his hand, slipped from his grasp and shattered on the stone terrace, the sound sharp and violent in the sudden tomb-like silence. Lily was staring, her face a canvas of confusion and horror. "Mom?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" I walked to her, through the wreckage of her father's life, and took her hand. It was cold as ice. "The truth, Lily," I said softly. "I'm finally telling the truth." The fallout was swift and absolute. Richard Sterling was done. His assets were frozen by federal marshals the next morning. His business partners invoked morality clauses to oust him. His name was quietly scraped off the donor walls. The media portrayed him as a villain of Shakespearean proportions, a man whose hubris had led to a spectacular public downfall at his own daughter's wedding. He took a plea deal, trading a chunk of his stolen fortune and a few years of his life for a lesser sentence. Healing with Lily was the hardest part. She was furious, humiliated, and heartbroken. She didn't speak to me for months. I gave her space, but I also gave her a copy of everything: Wexler's deposition, Arthur's financial reports, Richard's emails from Project Nightingale. I let the facts speak for themselves. The turning point came late one night with a tearful phone call. "He lied about everything," she sobbed. "My whole life, he lied." "I know, sweetie," I said, my own tears finally falling. "I know. Today, my life is my own. I got the full settlement I was owed from the beginning, plus punitive damages. I used it to start a foundation that provides grants for forensic accountants and legal aid for women fighting complex financial abuse. I live in a small house in Sausalito that looks out over the water, and the view is more beautiful to me than the one from the Pacific Heights mansion ever was. Lily and her husband are still together. Their love was strong enough to survive the inferno. We are closer than ever, our bond forged in the hard truth rather than a comfortable lie. Every year on her anniversary, we don't celebrate the wedding. We celebrate the day the truth came out. I don't regret what I did. I don't celebrate it either. It was a necessary amputation. Richard didn't just take my money. He tried to take my name, my sanity, my daughter, my past, and my future. He tried to erase me, so I took the one thing he truly loved, his own towering legacy, and turned it into his tombstone. The end